Welcome to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. The first story is called A Speedy Job. At the time, the late 1970s, I was working for a Scottish bank as a junior operator of a pair of mainframes leased from a big computer manufacturer that liked the color blue. These had been there a couple of years longer than me. One day I came into work to find both of the comfy swivel chairs at the consoles had been replaced with 2 to 3 boxes of 2-part screen listing. Green-lined computer paper with carbon paper between every sheet. Not very comfy at all. On querying about what was going on, it transpired that there was a great disturbance in the force. Or, to be more specific, static electricity seemed to be the cause of intermittent hardware interrupts and unexpected reboots of the mainframe. The workaround that seemed to work best was to use this large stack of insulation to protect the consoles from the people operating them. After a few days of investigation and data gathering, the vendor's engineer finally announced that he tracked down the root cause of their/our problems. Fade to 3 years earlier. You see, when installing hugely expensive mainframes to an incredibly tight timescale, this vendor likes to make sure that deadlines are met no matter what, in order to comply with service level agreements with the customer. So there had been a bonus on offer to the original engineer if he could complete the installation by date X. Well, wouldn't you know it. He was just about finished and right up against the clock when he realized that he needed a junction box to connect the consoles via underfloor cables to the power distribution unit or electricity supply. A reliable, industry-approved box could be sourced from the warehouse but would take until the next day to arrive. What to do? So the temptation of that big fat bonus was just too much for him. And surely a junction box is a junction box, right? I'm not sure if he was being malicious or just greedy, but he nipped out to the nearest branch of a store, snapped one up for a couple of quid, and a few minutes later, job done. Technically, he'd complied with the requirements to win his bonus. Fallout: 3 years later, the junction box failed and nearly put a major bank out of business. The next story is called Arrogant Mechanic. Years ago, my wife and I had a 13-year-old car with about 250,000 miles on the clock. It was mechanically sound and drove like a dream, but getting it through the annual UK emissions test was getting increasingly difficult. Usually it was just a case of running some injector cleaner through the engine and giving her a really good run before the test, so that the engine was fully up to temperature, etc. But one year the inspector attempted the test 3 times and failed her on high HG, i.e. unburnt fuel in the exhaust. I had a good look and found a crack in the exhaust manifold which was sucking in air. So engine management was compensating by injecting extra fuel. And as a result, the catalytic converter was fried. Being that the car was sound in every other aspect and I had no desire to replace it, I got my socket set out and started dismantling the exhaust system. All good, until I found 3 of the exhaust header nuts were seized and no amount of heat, lubricant and gentle persuasion was going to move them. I've been there before, and last time I spent 2 days carefully drilling out the studs. So my wife took the car into a local garage to get them to take a look and quote us for the work. The mechanic, a jerk who evidently thought he knew everything, checked it over and gave my wife a quote for a new cat, lambda sensor, manifold and labor. But he failed to consider the possibility of seized header nuts, and we certainly weren't going to tell him. The quote had some added extras that my wife hadn't asked for and came with an arrogant and condescending attitude. We have no doubt that this was because a woman couldn't possibly understand how a car works. He said, "I know it's a lot of money, love, but that car needs a lot done to it. Like heck it did." My darling beloved played the submissive wife part to perfection. "Oh, I'm not sure, I have to ask my husband." So the mechanic knocked a few quid off to sweeten the deal. After work that night, we looked over the quote, noticed all the unnecessary extra work on it, but we figured that with the time it would take me to sort out those seized nuts, it was worth it. If he wanted the job for that price, he could have it. So the next day, my wife takes the car back, confirms that the quote is a fixed price for the job and tells them to get on with it. "It will be ready this evening, love," the mechanic says, apparently happy with this deal. That afternoon we get a call. We had some problems. It will be a couple of extra days." A few days later, my wife goes back to pick up the car. The manager deals with it and informs my wife that there's an extra charge for the additional work required. My wife calmly slides the quote across the desk. "Your mechanic gave me a fixed price for the job. Here's the quote signed by him." The manager is quite obviously seething, begrudgingly takes payment for the agreed amount and hands over the keys together with a 12-month warranty for the parts that they used. She heard the manager screaming at the mechanic as she left. The next year I presented the car for its annual test. It failed on the cheap catalytic converter they had used. Back to the garage with the car, and my wife asked them to replace the cat. That will be £250 off, or however much it was. No, it won't, replied my wife and slides the warranty with 2 weeks left on it across the desk. They fixed it for free, but the manager told her in no uncertain terms never to darken his doorstep with that car ever again. The third story is called Closing Fee. A long time ago I worked at a company that gave me a retirement account through Fidelity. I eventually changed jobs to a different company that provided a retirement account through another provider. So I call up Fidelity to roll my old account funds into my new one. Fidelity can do that for me, but there's a $50 account closing fee. Why do they have an account closing fee? Because screw me, that's why. I try to be clever and say leave $1 in the account, but they require a $50 minimum in case you do want to close at a later date. Cue malicious compliance. Okay, roll over all my funds except for $50. Keep the account open. Send me quarterly updates on my $50. Invest it, make it grow. I now have a tradition. Once a year I call Fidelity to transfer over all but $50 of my account balance, usually just a check for a few dollars. By this point I've cost them way more than $50 of service, postage and checks they mail to me, but I still have a few decades to retirement. Let's see how much I can cost them before they give me my $50. I'll go to my grave with that account still open if it means Fidelity never gets the account closing fee. Why? Because screw them. The next story is called Go Ahead. I have 5 lines on my cell phone plan, 4 actual phones and an iPad. It's mine, my BFF's, his, now ex, wasn't when I got it girlfriend, her brother, one of my good friends and the iPad. For about a year and a half I was able to afford all 5 lines with no issues. This past month I wasn't able to run for a little bit after the holidays, so I was a little behind on the phone bill. I had asked her to chip in then, and she said she would, as she is a DoorDash driver and was making a ton of money, as she put it. I managed to eke out a $350 paycheck between then and now, and I managed to send it to her, as she said she was going up to the store to pay it. She didn't, we all got shut off, and my sister came through with the funds. I had asked the ex to send the money my sister sent me to help out, and she said she would, which hasn't happened yet. Now that we are caught up, I decided that I wasn't gonna see that money anyway. But the cordial thing to do is send her one final warning. Either have the funds by the end of the week or lose the phone. I think it's utter BS that you are making me come up with $270 in a week, was the reply. If I'm not mistaken, it is 2 weeks now. And didn't you say you made that in 2 days? I don't want to hear any more excuses. If you think that is necessary, then go ahead and shut our phones off, came the angry reply. Okay, game on. No sooner had I logged in to disconnect all data services to the lines that were not in my possession. I get an angry message from Facebook, from her ex-husband. Dude, that's her only line of communication and her only means of working. Why would you cut her off like that? She told me to, so I did. Well, that was dumb on her part, fair enough. He responded with a shoulder shrug emoji. What I didn't realize was that she was about to get a raise as a top driver with DoorDash, whatever that means. Oops, looks like she has to find another means of income now. The last story is called Retail Hell. The first job I ever worked at for a few years was a grocery retail store with several different departments, including a deli for lunch meat and cheese. This is where I worked. One night I was working 1 PM to 9 PM. 9 PM is when the deli and other special departments closed and were expected to be done and clocked out, but the rest of the store remained open 24/7 for general groceries. It was me and one other guy. We had an especially busy night and we were a little behind on our cleaning as a result. But we had our meat slicing machines already coated with sanitizer after working for 15 minutes to get all the little meat chunks and shavings out of every corner. We were pretty serious about making sure those things were clean as can be. It's about 8:55 at this point. We are almost late to leave and the store we worked for did not like overtime. If you were getting any amount of overtime, you would get chewed out the next day for it, even for a little amount. A woman walks up to the counter and starts looking through the product as we had a glass case filled with a bunch of types of our lunch meat pre-sliced and ready to go for baking up. She looks at one and says, "I want this turkey right here, but I want it freshly sliced." I, of course, look to my coworker and we both can see the 2 slicers we have are still covered in the sanitizer we use and are drying. And as per the food safety protocol written on the bottle, we had to allow it 20 to 30 minutes minimum for the sanitizer to dry after application. So I tell her, well ma'am, we really can't do that right now. Our slicers are both being cleaned at the moment as the department is closed in 5 minutes. But I'd be glad to get you something here from our cold case. So you're not gonna slice it fresh for me? That's what you're saying? I replied, that's correct, I apologize. Without another word, she walks away, and I and my coworker go back to what we were doing. We finish cleaning and go home after about 5 more minutes, narrowly clocking out on time. Fast forward 2 days later. I and the same coworker come in and start getting to work like a normal day. About 3 PM, 2 hours into my shift, I personally get called into the head honcho's office. The store director, as they are titled. I think nothing of it and head on upstairs and go inside the office and sit down. The store director hands me a piece of paper and says, tell me what caused this. I look at the paper and it's a printout screenshot of a Google review for our store, 1 star out of 5. It also had a full paragraph from that lady from 2 nights before, complaining that she didn't get her freshly sliced meat from the rude employee and then describes specifically me. I explained exactly what happened 2 nights prior. The director is getting heated and begins to cut me off while I'm speaking, asking, why would slicers be covered in sanitizer at 8:55? You are scheduled to work until 9 PM. I said yes, I am, but seeing as I am constantly being reminded not to get any overtime, I usually start cleaning them around 8:30 PM. The director gets even more upset and raises her voice. I don't care, that's not how it works. If you have a customer, you serve them. And you'd better start making sure those shelves are filled before you leave or you won't be working here anymore. Now get out. I'm pretty salty at this point. I go back down to the department and my coworker asks what happened and I told him. He says, so they want everything done before we leave? I said, yep, and without another word he knew what we needed to do. 9 PM hits as usual and our shelves are at the usual standard of half full. But seeing as we've been given a new standard, we decided to stay and make sure we did what I was instructed to do. We spent the next several hours past closing time, slicing and slicing and slicing, until every single tray of meat and cheese was full. We had plastic totes in the big fridge full of cheese that we sliced that were wrapped up in half-pound blocks for ease of sale. So we decided to fill the tub over the brim with every single type of cheese we had available. We cut up around 70 pounds of cheese and wrapped it up in the fridge. We also had a Subway-style sandwich counter where we made sandwiches to order and also pre-made on the shelves for sale. We made double the usual amount of sandwiches and filled the shelves as per request. Not a single shelf had a single empty spot on it by the time we were done. After every single possible item and shelf was as full as it could be, we finally started to clean and close. It was around 3 AM when we finally left. The department opens at 5. We were exhausted, but our spiteful overtime venture made us feel pretty good. We got about 6 hours of overtime in. They hated anyone getting even 5 to 10 minutes of overtime. We both came in the next day at 1 PM as usual, expecting complete retaliation. But nope. Instead, our department manager of the deli kinda saunters over to us. He says, hey, you should be good to start cleaning up at 8:30 like usual. I think she, the director, got the point you made. Normally, overtime would be asked to be taken care of by clocking out for lunches or coming in later than usual. But they let us keep all 6 hours of that overtime. They never said anything to us about overtime again after that. I accepted a job that paid almost double about 6 months after this incident and never ever went back to retail hell. And with that, we end today's video. Let me know what you think about the stories. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the stories and today's video? I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. And I hope you have a great day. Stay safe. Bye bye.